Welcome to Table for One. I'm the narrator, and today I'm going to be teaching you about Voidfall. In today's 5-minute refresh, I'm going to, as quickly as possible, teach you everything you need to know about Voidborn Skirmishes. Let's get rolling. All right, so let's talk skirmishing. And just as a reminder, before we get started, I always take this for granted a little bit, but there are chapters in all of my videos down in the description. So if you're looking for an answer to a very specific question, check down there and you can jump straight to that part. So I'm going to intersperse examples in this video. But in general, we're talking about skirmishing, and that means resolving this symbol right here. Also, if you're playing the co-op or solo, you may run into this symbol, which means to resolve the entire crisis board. But when you do that, you're also going to resolve a skirmish, which you can see the symbols all across the top of this board here. So let's go to the first section, which is going to be, when do you skirmish? If you're playing competitive, basically the only time you're ever going to skirmish is during the first step of the evaluation phase. So phase C, step 1, each player in turn order resolves a skirmish. There are only two things that could change this. If you are in the second cycle and your Galactic event was Scorched Earth, card 2F, it has this ongoing effect. In the evaluation phase, skip step 1, so you'll skip the skirmish in that cycle. Again, if you're playing competitive, you might also get this card in cycle 3, Wind of Annihilation. This is card 3G, and it says, at the end of each player's first turn, they must resolve a skirmish, and with a modifier, with +1 Voidborn Fleet Power. So if you're playing a competitive game, these are the only ways you could ever skirmish. It's just going to be during the evaluation phase, or after the first turn in cycle 3 if you have this Galactic event, and if you happen to draw this Galactic event in cycle 2, you'll skip the skirmish. Now, it's a little bit different if you're playing co-op or solo. In that case, you have a lot more opportunities to skirmish. So at the end of each cycle during the evaluation phase, you resolve the crisis board, which is just going to be a skirmish again, along with resolving this economic track on the bottom. But essentially, that's the same type of skirmish cadence as a competitive game. Now, here's the important differences. So in a solo or co-op game, there's a crisis board, and that requires crisis cards. And you can find more detail about how that whole system works. Link in the description. I've already done a video on that. But basically, all of these crisis cards, there's 2 from level 1, 3 from level 2, and 6 from level 3, have a skirmish as part of the immediate penalty if you fail to meet the objective on the card. So that introduces another way that you could have to resolve a skirmish. Additionally, there are 8 war cards. As many as 4 may find their way into your alert deck. So if you were to draw one of those cards, it would also cause you to skirmish at the end of that turn. I want to point out it is possible that your last turn of the cycle may either involve a war card or taking a penalty from one of these crisis cards. And if that's the case, the last thing you'll do on your turn is resolve the skirmish in either case, and then you'll go straight into the evaluation phase and have to resolve a skirmish again. So it is possible to have to skirmish back to back. So those are all the times that you might be required to skirmish. So the next thing I want to cover is, how do you determine where to skirmish? All right, so here's a simplified sort of setup. And in this map, this is your homeworld here, and you've got 3 sectors here. A Genesis sector and 2 standard sectors, as well as this asteroid belt here. And the Voidborn have a fleet in this rift and in this standard sector up here. There's also a Genesis sector here with no fleet power, and it's corrupted. There's a wormhole up here, and there's a Harbinger on the edge of the map there. There's also a void storm separating these 2 sectors. So when the Voidborn attack you, they're always going to attack you in a sector of yours that's adjacent to a Voidborn sector. So let's look at what that means. So this sector is a Voidborn sector because there's Voidborn Fleet Power in it, same as here. This sector has no fleet power. Even though it's corrupted, even though there's a void storm here, it's not a Voidborn sector because they have no fleet power there. So they will not attack the adjacent sector here from here. Now, depending on what mode you're playing in, there may be a Harbinger either on a sector or on the edge of a sector like this. In either case, that represents like a Voidborn presence. So if it's on the sector, it means that is a Voidborn sector, just like anything with Voidborn Fleet Power. If it's on the edge of a sector, then that just means this sector has adjacency to Voidborn right here. So even though there's no sector on this side, treat it as if there were a Voidborn sector here that could invade and skirmish you in this sector. So in this example, if we look at the Voidborn sectors, what's adjacent to a Voidborn sector where they might skirmish with us? Well, from here, they're adjacent to here and to the homeworld, but your home sector can never be attacked by the Voidborn. So this one is safe. This Voidborn sector is adjacent to this sector. It's also adjacent to this asteroid belt, but the asteroid belt can never be invaded by the Voidborn. So this one is safe from being skirmished. And then it's also adjacent to this wormhole, which makes it adjacent to this sector. So this Genesis sector could be invaded from the Voidborn through that adjacency here, or from the Harbinger on this side. And lastly, your sector here has the homeworld on one side, your asteroid belt, your Genesis sector, and then this sector with no fleet power. So it's not adjacent to any Voidborn sectors or Harbingers, so this sector is safe from being skirmished. So when the skirmish happens, the Voidborn will only skirmish in one of your sectors, even though there are multiple that are available. So again, in this scenario, they could skirmish here or here, but they're not going to do both. They're just going to pick one. Now, I'll talk in a minute about how to calculate the Voidborn Fleet Power for their attack into your sector. But when choosing a sector, after you have that calculated, they're going to prioritize whatever sector where they can win. So if they can defeat you in combat, that is going to be the sector that they choose. If they would win in multiple sectors, then they would go to wherever they would tie. Because if they tie, remember, then the sector becomes abandoned at the end of combat, and then the Voidborn takes it over anyway. So that's your second priority. If the Voidborn cannot defeat you in any of the eligible skirmish sectors, then they will prioritize the sector where they will force you to recall the most fleet power during combat. Now, if that's a tie, they'll prioritize whichever sector is pure. If there are multiple sectors and some are corrupted and some are pure, they'll prioritize a pure sector. And if there are multiple pure sectors, they'll choose the one with the highest population. Now, if it's still a tie, they'll prioritize the sector that has the most guilds in it. And if you are still tied at that point, you just choose randomly. So let's now talk about how to calculate Voidborn Fleet Power when they do attack you during skirmish. Okay, so let's talk very generally for a moment. When it's time to skirmish, the Voidborn will attack you with 1 fleet power for every corruption on your house mat. So what does that mean? You've got 3 agenda slots here at the bottom of your house mat that can be corrupted. You cannot corrupt your starting agenda slot. So there's 2 corruptions here. Also, each of your civilization tracks can be corrupted, and there's 1 corruption here. So in this instance, we would start with 1, 2, 3. The Voidborn would skirmish you with 3 fleet power. But there are a number of caveats to that. So let's talk about all the different modifiers. So that's how you would calculate it, say at the beginning of, or at the end of cycle 1. If you were in the evaluation phase here, you would go to skirmish, and this would apply to both the competitive and the cooperative and solo side of the board. When you go into the beginning of the evaluation phase in cycle 1, that's how you calculate your skirmish Voidborn Fleet Power. However, if you are in the evaluation phase, specifically this step in cycle 2 or 3, you're going to count this up again, 1, 2, 3, and add 1 Voidborn Fleet Power to it. So cycles 2 and 3, in this step, the Voidborn will have +1 fleet power during the skirmish, so in this case it would be 4. Now, there are no technologies that will modify this, but there's one that can cause some confusion, so let's talk about it real quick. Let's say you have decontamination chambers, which allows you to store corruption on this card. This does not count as part of your house mat. So in this instance, you would not count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Voidborn Fleet Power. You would ignore these two. This is not your house mat. This is your tech card. It would still be 1, 2, 3 would be your starting amount plus any modifiers. Now, another interesting modifier, let's get rid of Cortazar here and replace it with Cheveus, which is how I pronounce it because it's kind of like Dominaeum, Cheveus. Of all the houses, this is the only one that has a modifier to the skirmishes, at least in the game as it's released at launch. I don't know if they'll ever add more houses, but right here it says for all skirmishes for House Cheveus, +1 Voidborn Fleet Power. So if we go back to this example, set it up just like we had it with Cortazar. If you were here, you would start with 1, 2, 3. You don't count these, but you would add a 4th. And if this was the evaluation phase of cycle 2 or 3, you would add another. So you'd be up to 5 Voidborn Fleet Power invading your sector. Now, for all games, no matter what game mode you're playing, the skirmish could be modified by the Galactic events as well. So let's take a look at all the Galactic events that could modify a skirmish. So there are no modifiers in cycle 1. In cycle 2, I think we already saw this one, Scorched Earth. The evaluation phase skips step 1. So if this was the Galactic event, you would just skip this skirmish entirely for that cycle. Another cycle 2 card, Disruption Within. Any player with 40 or lower influence cannot be invaded, including via skirmish. So at any point during the cycle, if a skirmish comes up, that player can't be invaded. Now that would also mean if you're playing on co-op, and a skirmish is the immediate penalty, you cannot take that penalty if this applies to you, if your influence is too low, because you cannot be invaded, you cannot be skirmished, so you cannot take that penalty. And in fact, in the glossary for this particular card, it reads, in a cooperative or solo game, if the current crisis on your turn is showing a skirmish as a penalty, the card must be discarded without any effect, including the additional combat resolution effect. But it means when you get to the evaluation phase, this skirmish here, or resolving the crisis board, if that were the case, you would just skip that step completely. Now, Adapting Darkness is also a Cycle 2 event, and it says, for each improved technology that a player has, the Voidborn gain 1 salvo absorption during each skirmish against them. So that's for the entire cycle, which would include, again, the evaluation phase here, as well as any other skirmishes that might come up during the cycle from other means, such as crisis cards, war cards. And the last Galactic event to talk about is during Cycle 3. It's Wind of Annihilation, and at the end of each player's first turn, they must resolve a skirmish, and it also modifies it with +1 Voidborn Fleet Power. So again, you would count up what's on your house mat, and apply, if you're playing with this house, apply this modifier, and then you would resolve a skirmish with another +1. Now, if this is a Cycle 3 card, you don't add another one for this, because this modifier only applies to this specific skirmish in this step, not to all skirmishers during that cycle. Now, if you're playing solo or co-op, you've got this crisis board out here, and you may have several ongoing crises on the military crisis track here at the top. What that track does is it modifies all skirmishes, regardless of when they happen or why they're triggered. For all skirmishes, you'll look at the leftmost unoccupied space. So in this case, it's this one here, and this modifier is +2 Voidborn Fleet Power for all skirmishes. So again, if this was your Galactic event, and it told you to skirmish at the end of Cycle 1 with +1 Voidborn Fleet Power, you would also do another +2. So you'd count what's on your player mat for your agendas, and for your civilization tracks. In this case, you would add your house modifier as well. So you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Voidborn Fleet Power would be invading. Now, 7 Voidborn Fleet Power is going to take 3 fleet tokens. And normally that's too many Voidborn Fleet tokens for any sector except a rift. But treat skirmish the same way as you would treat your own invasion. When you're invading on your turn, you can move as many fleet power and as many fleet tokens into a single sector as you want. And then at the end of your turn, you'll have to remove tokens until you're back down to a maximum of 2 fleet tokens per sector. Similarly, the Voidborn can have any number of fleet tokens in a sector when they come to skirmish. But at the end of the skirmish, if the Voidborn win, you just remove all of the Voidborn that are remaining and replace it with 1 fleet token with 2 fleet power on it. That's the case for any time the Voidborn win a skirmish. So the point is that they can invade with any number of fleet power. Now, if you're playing solo or co-op, there are a couple other modifiers we should talk about real quick. If you are resolving a skirmish as the result of an immediate penalty on a crisis card, some of these have a modifier. So in this example here, you skirmish and the Voidborn have +2 approach absorption. The other possibility is we're skirmishing not because of a penalty, but because we've drawn a war card. Now, these war cards could have a variety of modifiers as well, and this is a easy mode war card. If you are skirmishing in cycle 1 on this card, the Voidborn will have -1 Voidborn Fleet Power, so it's a little bit easier. Whereas if you're skirmishing in cycle 3, they will have +1 salvo absorption, so you'll have to take that into account during the skirmish. You'll want to keep track of that salvo absorption. So those are all the places to look for calculating Voidborn Fleet Power for the skirmish, as well as any potential modifiers like absorptions, additional fleet power, or certain effects that'll trigger if you successfully defend the skirmish. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is where the Voidborn come from when they do skirmish. Okay, so let's say this is the setup, and I've just completed my first turn during cycle 3, and this was the Galactic event. And it says, so it's at the end of each player's first turn, they must resolve a skirmish with +1 Voidborn Fleet Power. So we're going to skirmish. I have 1, 2, 3 corruption here on my mat. +1 for playing with this house is 4, +1 for that modifier. Even though it's cycle 3, we don't add 1 for this modifier because we're not in the evaluation phase. So I have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Voidborn Fleet Power. Now I've moved the map around a little bit, so the only Voidborn sector is this one. And from this sector, the only adjacent sectors are my home sector and this outpost, and the home sector can never be invaded. So this will have to be the target of the skirmish. So I'm going to take 5 Voidborn Fleet Power and move it into that sector. Now this is important. Do not move this Voidborn Fleet Power out and just don't touch it at all. The Voidborn are attacking you from the void. So you use this adjacency to figure out which sector they're going to target, but once you've selected that sector, just pretend they're coming top down onto the map this way, and you're going to add Voidborn Fleet Power that were not previously on the map, like so. So here's their 5 Voidborn Fleet Power against my 1 Fleet Power. Now in this case, they've got higher initiative, so they attack first. I have to recall this Fleet Power, and I don't even get a chance to fire back, so they've taken over the sector. Now, because I've lost the skirmish, there's a couple of things I need to do. First, if I have glory tokens, which I haven't set up in this case, but assuming I have some, I must discard 1 glory token. Second, if there's any installations, which are sector defenses, shipyards, or star bases, which would be up here, they would all be removed at this point. Guilds remain. Then you remove all the remaining Voidborn Fleet Power from the sector, and now treat the sector as an abandoned sector. Now, as a reminder, the other steps for an abandoned sector are you add a corruption to the population die if it's not already corrupted, and if it's possible to corrupt. Again, some sectors cannot be corrupted, so keep that in mind if that's the case. And then you're also going to add a Voidborn Fleet token with 2 fleet power and 1 random bounty token. Now, don't forget, depending on why you've skirmished, there may be modifiers for after the fact, particularly if you've successfully defended, such as gaining a bounty token or adding perhaps sector defense to an adjacent Voidborn sector. So don't forget to keep track of any post-skirmish modifiers. But that's it. That's everything you need to know about skirmishes in Voidfall. So I hope this was helpful. I hope I haven't confused you. I hope this was educational and got you the info you needed. If there's something I missed or something you didn't understand, please let me know in the comments and I'll make sure to address it. And if you found this video helpful, I would really appreciate it if you'd consider subscribing and leaving a like, and then tell all your friends to do the same. And if there's anything else you want to tell me in the comments, please let me know. I always make sure to read those and I respond when I can, so it's always appreciated. So that's what I've got for today. Thank you so much for watching Table for One, and I will see you next time.